Hello, can you hear me okay? I'm told you can't hear me. Okay, you can hear me. So hopefully you can hear me. Hello everyone, my name is Jillian Lee, and I'm the CEO here at National Alzheimer's Buddies. Our nonprofit seeks to alleviate the emotional and social challenges that stem from Alzheimer's disease through building friendships with college volunteers who regularly visit Buddies. We believe that the resident volunteer connection serves the purpose of engaging the residents and enabling them to overcome the daily social challenges of Alzheimer's disease. The theme for this year's symposium is Alzheimer's disease across cultures. Alzheimer's disease, internationally, it's predicted that by 2050, 139 million individuals will be living with some form of dementia. Therefore, it is extremely important to bring awareness to Alzheimer's disease on a global scale. Today's symposium will consist of one keynote speaker, a panel discussion digging into the international differences in dementia, a day in the life of our student volunteers, a second panel discussing the US-based differences in dementia, and a roundtable talk diving into the cultural and global differences of Alzheimer's disease and dementia. We will be starting off today with our keynote speaker, Dr. Maria Ferretti. Dr. Maria Ferretti is a neuroscientist and neuroimmunologist and an expert in Alzheimer's disease and gender medicine. In 2016, she co-founded the nonprofit organization Women's Brain Project, where she currently serves as the chief scientific officer based in Switzerland, where she will be able to provide a European perspective on Alzheimer's disease and related dementias. She is also a world leader in the study of sex and gender characteristics in brain and mental health as the gateway to precision medicine. Dr. Maria Ferretti's full bio can be found on our website. Unfortunately, Dr. Ferretti was unable to join us live today, but was able to pre-record her keynote address for us. It is my pleasure to share with you Dr. Maria Ferretti's keynote address.
Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Maria Teresa Ferretti. I'm the Chief Scientific Officer and co-founder of a nonprofit organization called the Women's Brain Project. I'm very sorry that I cannot be with you live today, and I'm extremely grateful for this invitation. So I would have really liked to be there, but unfortunately I had a conflict in my agenda. So I'm very grateful that actually we found this solution and that I can still share with you some thoughts and some ideas on Alzheimer, and especially the sex and gender dimension of it. So thanks a lot to the organizers for this invitation. I have to say that I'm a big fan of the Alzheimer's Buddy program. I think it's absolutely amazing, and I hope that it will spread also to other countries, especially in Europe. And just checking your website, actually something that really resonated with me is the sentence where you say that you train students to actually learn about the disease and see the person beyond the disease. And every person is different and has different needs. And this really resonates with me and with the work that I do at the Women's Brain Project. It's really the base, the foundation of what we do, the whole idea that every patient, every person is different with individual needs, and also science should start taking this into consideration. So this is really what I would like to tell you about today, to give you a little bit of a sense of this type of precision medicine approach, right? So the importance of considering the individual needs of each person when studying Alzheimer's. Individual needs will be different also if people are men, women, or identify with other sex and gender identities. And I can, what I'm hoping to do with this talk is to give you a little bit of an update of where our thinking is and where the science is in this respect. Let me start by just saying a few words about the Women's Brain Project, and I think I can also share some slides with you just to make it easier for me to tell you about the Women's Brain Project. This, for those of you who are not familiar, is a non-profit organization that I co-founded together with Antonella Santuccia-Machada and Anna-Marie Schumacher-Dimmer in Switzerland in 2017. We are a group of scientists, so this is an association. It's largely composed by scientists, but also experts coming from different disciplines. I'm a neuroscientist. My background is really pharmacology, and my main expertise is Alzheimer's, but we have experts coming from very different fields, but they are all united because of this common goal, which is actually to improve the current state of medical treatment and drug and solution development, especially for brain and mental health. So we have a focus on brain as an organ and neurological and psychiatric disorders. And what we are trying to do is to improve the way these disorders are treated by promoting science and innovation that takes into consideration these individual needs. And we use sex and gender differences as, we call it, the gateway to precision medicine. So the first thing that distinguishes us, a very basic characteristic, is actually our biological sex. And then we have our cultural, socioeconomic, social-cultural construct of gender. And already those are determinants of health. Already those make our experience as patients different. And even that is not properly taken into account by science and medicine currently. So that's why we decided to create the Women's Brain Project to actually study these differences, advocate, and make sure that these are considered in medicine. So this is what we do. I'm representing here today this group, and we exist since more than 6 years. Many people have joined this group and participated and given different contributions, largely in Europe, but also at the global level. We have collaborations with the States, with Canada, with Asia, with Australia, and so on and so forth. However, one person that I would like to tell you something about, because she is definitely special. She is a Women's Brain Project ambassador, and she represents for me as an inspiration, and she has been absolutely crucial and instrumental when we were starting to build the Women's Brain Project, as our paths have crossed, and I have learned a lot from her. So this really speaks to my personal experience with Alzheimer, because her name is Sofia Pettersson, and she's a young lady in her 40s that has been diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's disease. She contacted me in 2016 as she was looking for information about clinical trials in Alzheimer's disease. And that's how we befriended. We started a conversation that never ended, basically, because I found she was an absolutely amazing person. It was, for me, the first time that I was meeting a person in such an early stage of the disease. So actually, you could hardly say that there was anything with Sofia. And she is an absolutely incredible person, absolutely outstanding. And her whole experience with the disease was also so inspiring and dramatic, but at the same time so striking that we really wanted to work with her. We asked her to become our ambassador, and we did a lot of projects together. I can show you one slide again, so you see how Sofia looks like. If you open our website, actually, we have a beautiful picture of Sofia on our homepage. And if you check on our blog and news portion of the website, you will see that we have a section that's called Sofia's Story. And because we offer her a platform on our website to actually share her story. When we heard her story, which was so amazing, that we said, you have to tell this story, share it with the world. So very briefly, she has a genetic form of Alzheimer's disease. And so this is a disease that runs in her family. She knew what the disease was because she saw first a grandmother dying with it, also an uncle, and then very close to her father. We are talking, therefore, about a person that before being a patient has been a caregiver in her teenager years. So she knew exactly the caregiving pathway. She lives in Sweden, so it's a country that is actually very well supported by the state, but still the caregiving burden was extremely high on her. And she talks a lot about this part of the experience. And then what happened was that actually she started to notice some symptoms, not being herself. And she describes in some of the most beautiful blog posts that I really encourage you to check and read, her whole diagnostic journey, right? This journey to try and have a diagnosis because she knew that something was wrong with her, but she was so young. She wasn't even 40 back then. That, of course, doctors were very cautious and they tried to find any other possible solution and diagnosis to justify why she was so tired, why she was so forgetful, why she was struggling so much to keep it all together, right? We are talking about a young woman in her prime years with a career, brilliant career, two young daughters, teenagers, so tons of things to organize, coordinate, and all in the sudden, she couldn't do it anymore. She would be tired, she would miss appointments, she would, mess up schedules, extremely frustrated also with her daughters and her family. And she wanted to know why this was happening to her. Well, it's taken her years to get the diagnosis because really nobody was really accepting the idea that anything could be wrong with a person so young. And the initial test that Sophia was doing for when she insisted that she wanted to know if everything was okay with her brain were some neuropsychological tests that are extremely easy, so they are designed to depict and detect dementia in very advanced stages, but this was not a problem back then. So even the tests that were administered were not sensitive enough. And so even it really just when she finally managed to get a biomarker-based diagnosis, so she reached a research center where she could receive a PET scan and a CSF analysis, then it was clear that she had Alzheimer's pathology in her brain, and also there was a genetic analysis done, and she turned out to be a carrier of a mutation, a familial mutation that causes genetic Alzheimer's disease. But that was after a few years, and in a way, of course, it was a terrible news, but in a way, it was even a relief for Sophia because at least she knew what was happening to her. The problem is that she knew it all too well because she had seen the movie already, right, with her father. So she knew what would happen to her daughters, and she embarked on a journey to fight against this thing. And she wanted to join a clinical trial. She wanted to do something about it. Problem is she was so young that there was no clinical trial that would actually accept her. And that's when, she started contacting half of the planet, including me, and that's how we met each other. Why am I telling you this story about Sophia? The story about Sophia, I'm sharing this with you, and it's public, open, you can find it online and read the whole story in her own words. Has been a huge learning point for me. Back then, I was a researcher working at the University of Zurich as a postdoc and group leader. I was in the lab doing my research with my animal models, the cells, the microscopes, the pipette, the tubes, Alzheimer. That was Alzheimer for me. And then Sophia knocked at my door, and so that's when that was my first encounter with Alzheimer, the disease and the human dimension of it. And what Sophia taught me were a number of things. Being a woman, especially, she taught me, she really gave me an absolutely clear example of what can mean have Alzheimer when you're a woman. The first thing that struck me was her experience as a caregiver. And this is something that is shared in many different countries. Caregiving burden is mostly carried by women, very often the wives or the daughters. Daughters-in-law and so on and so forth. So the caregiving dimension that is culturally so expected to be carried by women. And that's something that she told me a lot about. And she had to do it when she was a teenager, so definitely not your ideal experience as a teenager. So something that has changed the trajectory of her life, of course. So the caregiving dimension was one thing. But also, it really struck me the struggle that she had for getting a diagnosis, an early diagnosis. We know that it's hard to diagnose Alzheimer's in its early stage. We know that Alzheimer's starts much earlier than the dementia stage, but actually catching it in these early stages when the pathology is just starting to form in the brain is extremely hard, and the tests we currently have are not sensitive enough. So she kind of opened up this window very clearly to me, I mean, it became very obvious to me that we have to do something to improve our current diagnostic approaches. And actually something that I learned in those same years, because we were starting to study differences between men and women in Alzheimer's, is that actually this is particularly a problem for women. Because actually there are studies showing that women tend to outperform men in some of these neuropsychological tests. You might also know from common experience that actually women tend to have a better verbal memory than men. So if I tell you a story and then I ask you to give me some of the elements of this story in maybe 30 minutes or 1 hour, women will remember better, especially this type of verbal information. And so a lot of neuropsychological tests that we currently use for detecting early stages of Alzheimer are based on verbal memory. And those are tests where women tend to outperform men, even if they already have pathology in their brains somehow compensate. And so they will just ace this test, exactly like Sophia was doing. So she was kind of a living example of things that we were studying in research, in papers, in those years. So that was a huge problem for a person like Sophia, young, still fit, still very bright. The tests we have are not good enough, so we need to find better tests for everybody, in particular for women like Sophia. And the third thing that really impressed me about Sophia, and I want to share with you, was her struggle to join a clinical trial. Even though she was, very well educated, she knew exactly what a clinical trial was. She really wanted to join one, and still, yet it was so difficult. For the age limitation, but then of course, this opened up a huge conversation between us about the challenges in joining a clinical trial. Even when somebody wants to do it, actually you need a study partner, you need a person that takes you there, you need a full family support. Studies as Women's Brain Project have shown that this can be much harder for women than men, and we have actually an underrepresentation of women in clinical trials for Alzheimer's disease. We think due to this type of issues, but we are still trying to understand. So with Sophia, I actually learned a lot, and Sophia has given me an incredible motivation to actually further study and advocate for these topics. The topic of sex and gender differences, so the specific needs of men and women, biological needs, because there are biological differences, and the way the pathology develops, the way these biomarkers work can be very different between men and women, but also sociocultural differences, for instance, the caregiving. We have this incredible burden on women that are over 70% of caregivers, and they experience a very strong burden. And actually this is something that takes away women from the society, because they have to drop their jobs and drop whatever they're doing to take care of their loved one. And this, in the long run, is absolutely unsustainable. I mean, we need to support all caregivers, but in particular women, to make them able to still be active parts of the society. So these are all things that we were working on. The experience with Sophia has reinforced and inspired us to work even more on this. And just to give you a sense of the type of projects we do at the Women's Brain Project, here is a collection of some of our work that you can actually check online if you wish. We publish papers, peer-reviewed papers. This was a key publication in 2018, where we provide an overview of what can be the differences between men and women. I have to say, meanwhile, a lot more work has been done, so we might need to update this. But we have collected the state of the art of the research in this field, which we have actually actively promoted, because I have been going around asking everybody to do research on this. You can find the state of the art in this book, which is the first textbook on this topic, which we have published with Elsevier last year. So this is quite updated, and it's your key resource if you're interested in these differences. And this covers biological differences, clinical differences, for instance, the symptoms, the diagnosis, the biomarkers, clinical trials, but also socioeconomic dimension of these differences between men and women. And finally, I have written a book. It's in Italian. Unfortunately, I'm looking for support to translate it in English and publish it internationally. but I've written a book for the lay public where I try to explain the latest news in our field and how, you know, I think we have a revolution that is happening because things are really moving forward. And one of the elements of this revolution is for sure gender medicine. So the realization in the research field that actually men and women might have different needs. So this is the work we do, and I encourage you to follow us. Just to give you an additional piece of information, we have also started a very interesting project where we actually wanted to hear the voice of the patients and the people living with Alzheimer's disease. It's called our Patient Pathway Project. And this is when we said, you know, and up to that point, we had done a lot of research and look at data, but we wanted to hear from the voice of the people living with this disease. And so what we did was a survey-based study in collaboration with Charles River Associates and supported by Novo Nordisk and Lilly, and also in collaboration with Alzheimer's Disease International. We have done this survey where we have asked men and women living with Alzheimer's disease and their caregivers to share with us their experience. And we asked specific questions because we wanted to see at which point the experience of a patient would diverge if you are a man and you are a woman. And we have found a lot of differences. We have some preliminary results. There will be a peer-reviewed publication that we will publish hopefully next year. But I just want to give you a sense that this is also something we are looking very actively into, and I can confirm based on this research that actually from the very early stages of, you know, noticing the first symptoms that you notice, who picks up in the family what's happening, it's mostly the women, spoiler, but also your journey, so what doctor you decide to go to, how long it takes for you to have a diagnosis, what type of treatment you're recommended. These are all things that can be different for men and women. And actually, it's the first time that we have some data to show it. And my message to you today, and so what I hope you will remember from my talk today, is that actually, if you're a man or a woman with Alzheimer's disease, makes a difference. Your whole experience as a patient is different. And we think that this is something medicine should take into account. So families should be aware of this. Doctors should be aware of this, and companies that are working to develop solutions for improving the lives of people living with Alzheimer's should be aware of this, because we need tailored and personalized approaches. I think I have one more slide that I wanted to show to you. This is exactly the slide on the patient pathway, just to a very simplified version to show you, you know, in this ideal sequence of events from before symptoms to management, we have studied different aspects, and these are some of the differences that we have found. This is really my key message, that women and men have differences in symptoms detection, in support attitude, treatment regimens, disease management. So it is different for men and women. Of course, this is just the tip of the iceberg, right? Because then the experience will be different according to the culture, your country you're living with, the culture, your ethnic background, and a number of other variables. But I think it's really important that we start considering this. It is very likely that we have had such a hard time finding solution for Alzheimer's disease because we have pulled together people that actually had different diseases. So now with a precision medicine approach, with biomarkers, but also with this understanding of these individual needs and individual characteristics, I really think we can promote a new type, an improved version of a more sustainable approach to these disorders. And this is what the Women's Brain Project is doing, and this is really my passion. And I think that this is also what the Alzheimer's Study Program and you all listening to this are doing by working with the people living with dementia and seeing the person beyond the disease, and every person is different. So I would like to thank you for the work you're doing and for listening to me. And also thank you on behalf of the whole team. I hope you will follow us on social media, and I'm of course always here to answer questions, and feel free to reach out to us. So thank you.
We are grateful to Dr. Maria Ferretti for her role as co-founder of Women's Brain Project in providing her European perspective on Alzheimer's disease and related dementias. We will now continue along to our international panel discussing where we will hear from individuals from all over the world who will share their international perspective of Alzheimer's disease across cultures. It is my pleasure to introduce our panelists. Here to represent South America is Dr. Rafael Castillos. Dr. Castillos is a neurologist at Hospital de Clínicas de Porto Alegre, Southern Brazil, and a graduate professor of medicine at the Federal University of Rio Grande do Sul. His main area of research is dementia, especially early stages of Alzheimer's disease. Here to represent Asia is Dr. Manjari Tripathi. Dr. Tripathi is a professor of neurology at All India Institute of Medical Sciences in New Delhi, India. Her main areas of interest are epilepsy, cognition, and sleep. Her current research in dementia looks at genetic, risk factors, and functional imaging. Here to represent Africa is Dr. Celestino Abua. Dr. Abua is a professor of pharmacology and therapeutics, fellow of Uganda Academy of Science, and currently the vice chancellor of Mombasa University of Science and Technology. His scientific work is currently focused on building capacity for research in non-communicable disease, especially Alzheimer's disease and related dementias that are poorly understood with minimal primary care interventions in the context of rural Uganda. Here to represent Australia is Dr. Darshini Ayutin. Dr. Ayutin is Deputy Head of Health and Social Care Unit at the School of Public Health and Preventative Medicine located at Monash University in Melbourne, Australia. More on Dr. Ayutin's bio can be found on our website along with our panelists today. Due to time zone differences, Dr. Ayutin has some pre-recorded responses that we will show, but she will be joining us live at 5:25 a.m. Australian time for the roundtable discussion. Questions were sent in, but please continue to use the Q&A button to continue to submit questions for our panelists. I would like to welcome our three panelists, Dr. Castillos, Dr. Tripathi, and Dr. Abua. Please tell us a little more about yourself, something maybe you do for fun, and some quick advice you could provide for our students on the call.
So who's starting?
Sure, you can start first.
Okay, hi everybody out there. I'm Dr. Manjari. I'm a neurologist in the northern part of India, in Delhi, which is the capital of the country. I am also the president of the ARDSI Delhi chapter. So we do have a society dedicated for the welfare of people with Alzheimer's disease. I also, run the Cognitive Disorders Clinic at my institute, which runs, every Monday. Now, we do see a lot of people with cognitive issues. The majority of them are Alzheimer's, followed by vascular, diffuse Lewy body disease, then Parkinsonian syndromes with dementia. Then often it's nutritional B12 associated cognitive decline. And of course, there are mixed pictures, normal pressure, hydrocephalus, and so many other causes. I basically am interested in newer therapies and options available. I'm also interested in caregiving perspectives on which we've published. And we do have certain unique, scenarios in India, which I'd love to discuss with you in terms of providing care and who provides care to people with, dementia. So that's as far as my work goes. And, I could answer more depending on the questions that come in.
Okay, my name is Rafael. And I'd like to thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure to talk about to talk with you about dementia and to give some perspectives from Brazil and South America. I'm a neurologist from Hospital de Clínicas de Porto Alegre. It's the southmost part of Brazil. I'm here in the capital city of the southmost states. My city is Porto Alegre. It's cold here. And I think I'm coordinate the outpatient clinic of dementia in my hospital, and we see also as Dr. Tripathi a lot of Alzheimer's, a lot of vascular, a lot of mixed type dementia. Some patients with Lewy body and frontotemporal dementia. And my research, I'm very interested in the early stages of Alzheimer and other types of dementia, but especially I'm conducting some research of inequalities in the diagnosis and treatment, in all kinds of dementia. So I will give you some perspectives that I think is maybe similar in to the other continents. So thank you again.
So thank you. First of all, I apologize. I don't know whether you're able to hear me. There's a
We
lot
can
of
hear you. We can hear you.
You can. There's a lot of
Yeah.
background noise. I am at the airport, courtesy of the flight, the carrier I am supposed to take. The pilots are on strike, so I've been a bit
Okay.
stranded at the airport. But hopefully I should be boarding another flight shortly. So my name is Celestino Obua. I am a professor of pharmacology and therapeutics. I think by virtue of that, I'm allowed to wander everywhere around medicine because we believe that everybody, all health professionals practice some form of pharmacology or the other. Now, currently I am based in rural southwestern Uganda. So Mbarara University of Science and Technology is the rural southwestern part of Uganda. And what drove me to begin to think about dementia is the experience that we were seeing, observing in the psychiatric clinic and in the hospital generally. We were seeing quite a number of aged individuals come in with symptoms of Alzheimer's or various forms of cognitive impairment, but we don't have a structural format of taking care of them. So I started thinking we need to build capacity to take care of these people. First of all, getting our practitioners begin to think of dementia or Alzheimer's disease as an area of primary focus. Yes, we do not have people who are trained in gerontologists or people who are trained primarily as neurologists. So often it is psychiatrists that also double as neurologists. But then because of the other burden of mental illnesses, often dementia is downplayed, they're not taken care of. And so I decided to put up a team. I am working with 2 psychiatrists. I'm working with an implementation scientist, myself and a number of other people, clinicians, to begin to build capacity in the area of trying to understand dementia in the rural area. And if I was to be given time, I don't know whether this is the time to just give a little brief about, or we just stop at introduction for now. My fear is that in the next, hopefully in the next 45 minutes, I might be called to go on board. So let me stop at introducing myself that way, but it is one area, Alzheimer's or dementia is one area that has not been taken seriously, even in our health system. And so some of the stories, some of the findings that I'm going to be telling later will bring to light the stark problems that patients who suffer from dementia are faced with. Otherwise, for now, let me stop there. And I hope you've been able to tolerate with the background noise of the plane.
Thank you for those introductions. Our first question today is for Dr. Castillos. How do differences in lifestyles within Brazil contribute to differences in Alzheimer's disease outcomes or comforts?
Yeah, I think that for most people with dementia here in Brazil, perhaps because of little guidance that family receive from doctors and other people in the health system, they have this course that is very restricted to their homes. They have here few leisure activities. Of course, this is very variable, but we have here in Brazil a strong inequality. We have part of society that's rich or have health insurance and easy access to doctors and the health system, and the most part of the population is poor and depends of the national health system, the SUS, we call here SUS. So what I see in my hospital that we serve a very poor population is that people with dementia have a very troubled course of illness. What we see here is that the caregiving burden, of course, is generally quite high for most caregivers. We don't have here nursing homes, so most poor people are caring in their own homes. So it's a very for most patients a very complicated course, and we see that economical and social inequalities intensify the care of the patient is very hard for the caregivers here.
Thank you for that response. Our next question is for Dr. Tripathi. They ask, stigma for Alzheimer's disease is prevalent in India with over 90% of individuals not even receiving a diagnosis. Do you see this changing? / what type of care do these individuals receive?
So yeah, stigma is the elephant in the room, and this results mainly from lack of understanding, knowledge about the condition. Most people in India feel that it is normal to decline in memory and many other functions of planning, judgment, execution, calculation, reading, writing, slowly as we age. So there is this false belief that it's a normal part of aging, and this is just just because he's 70 or 80, this is happening, and they don't even recognize it as a disease. So there is a lack of knowledge about what is the impact of declining memory and other cognitive domains at that age. This lack of knowledge very often leads to a phenomenon of denial, not accepting the fact that the person is becoming dependent on others, because so far they have been doing everything themselves and now they are kind of requiring assistance. So very often it's just put as, the assistance is required because there's aging, so there's a denial about the process. And even if the diagnosis is offered based on the clinical history, as well as the neuropsychological parameters, the brain MRI and the PET, etc., there is an element of doubt and denial. As many people are not aware of this, there is this restriction which comes upon the elderly, where a person who has cognitive issues is, confined to the house, not introduced to the friends and family, and maybe, just isolated, which is very, very harmful for their overall cognitive, rehabilitation or cognitive preservation. So really, this is due to, this stigma aspect of it. The stigma aspect also prevents them from having a good health-seeking behavior. So they don't really go to hospitals, or they don't reach out for problem solving, whether it be a problem solving with their activities of daily living, whether it be a problem solving with their problem behaviors of agitation, wandering, aggression, etc. So they don't reach out to people who could possibly help. Very often, because of the lack of awareness, a person who's genuinely interested in knowing about the problem because his or her father or mother have the problem starting, are often left, grappling at, straws, in the sense of looking at the Google or, the Google doctor, or looking at social media, or looking at some, blogs about Alzheimer's disease. They often have to start hunting for, doctors who are going to look after the process, caregivers, as well as they often have to look and seek help for all the problem behaviors which the patient has through helplines. So really, stigma impacts everything. It impacts the way we can diagnose it early. Usually they come in late, and it's so late that usually they're incontinent. So the incontinence and the bad behavior brings them to the doctor, rather than the mild memory and the mild, reading, writing, or calculation issues. So very often stigma also results in the patient coming late to us.
Thank you for that response. Our next question is for Dr. Abua. How can pharmacological advances in Alzheimer's disease treatment complement care?
Thank you, Gillian, for that question. While the global West has employed advances in pharmacological treatments for general symptomatic relief of Alzheimer's disease, as we know, there is no proper cure to the disease. These options are sparsely available or not available at all for most of our patients. And even as research continues to look for more effective treatments, the current use of drugs such as acetylcholine esterase inhibitors, such as donepezil and so on, galantamine and so on. These have been used, but in very rare situations where few patients were able to get in contact with psychiatrists. Now, from the beginning, I said that we don't have formal care for patients with Alzheimer's disease. There's no institutionalized care for these patients. Most of the time, patients are treated by family members at home. But often, they only realize that there's a problem when the cognitive impairment has become very severe. In most cases, the mild cases of cognitive impairment are, just like my colleagues have talked about the stigma. People will sneer at them, this poor old man or woman beginning to forget things. They laugh at them and say, after all, it is part of aging and does not require treatment at all. So rarely are individuals brought to care early enough for them to begin to benefit from pharmacological treatment. It is true that when intervened early enough in the mild or to moderate cases of Alzheimer's disease, there is some effect, there is some improvement, either in their behavior, or if it maintains them in that state for some time before it deteriorates to severe cognitive impairment. So yes, the medicines are there. However, one of the biggest challenges is that even for those who have been able to get in touch with health facilities, these medicines are often out of reach because of the cost of the medicines. So even for families that are able to take their relatives for care in institutions, in hospitals, the cost of medicines are prohibitive. They will start the medication for a short while, and then they will stop the medication because they can no longer continue with the medication. So most of the time, there is no pharmacological treatment. Because most of the patients who are suffering from dementia are cared for at home by family members, often either a wife or a daughter, because the men do not really take time caring for any sick person. So it is a task given to female relatives. But we also want to note that the majority of patients who are suffering dementia are actually women. And so it becomes a lot easier for a daughter, a sister, or a close relative to take care of these older persons who are having dementia. So these drugs are available, they're in the market, but because of their costs, it is just not affordable by patients. I don't think that there is any form to say that we are, in other words, the practitioners are aware of the medications, but what limits the use of the medicines, one, the affordability, and two, that often patients are brought in extremely late, that there is hardly any effect that can be attributed to the application of the medicines.
Thank you for that response as well. So now we're going to open up to the floor. So this was a question for everyone, so feel free to respond. So for individuals who do not have access to top quality care, how can those patients be supported outside of the clinic?
Yeah, so I could respond there if it's okay. Hello.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
Yes, please,
okay.
go ahead.
So,
please.
So basically it's a very common scenario because at least in India, the quality of care is very heterogeneous. You have the capitals or the Tier 1 cities where you have big hospitals, you have specialized neurologists, psychiatrists, geriatric specialties. Then you have the Tier 2 cities, and then you have, the smaller cities or the Tier 3 cities, and then you have the rural hinterlands. Now, virtually in the rural hinterlands and the Tier 3 cities, there is lack of availability of, any of the neurologists or psychiatrists or, trained geriatricians. It's mostly a general physician, and sometimes it's not even that. It may be an alternate medicine practitioner, a herbal medicine practitioner. So really, there is a challenge of managing these patients pharmacologically. But with the advent of COVID, the good thing which happened was there was a medicine facility which was set up and linked many rural areas to big centers. So most of the times, if the doctor is not available to make the diagnosis, a proper history taking given by the local healthcare provider, who could be a non-doctor, who could be a herbal doctor, whatever, that kind of history is teleported to us, and or to centers where telemedicine is available, and based on the history, a possible or approximate diagnosis is offered, and then symptomatic therapy is offered after doing few blood tests, like ruling out B12 deficiency, which is common. Particularly, we have a huge vegetarian population, so doing a serum B12 is a must in all our evaluations, as well as a thyroid function. In alcoholics, we do CT to rule out a subdural, which is again a cause of cognitive decline. So that's as far as offering the diagnosis and starting doing the tests, and at least a CT can be done, in the rural areas. And based on the CT showing some atrophy posteriorly or whatever, and all the blood tests being normal, a possible Alzheimer's diagnosis could be made if your history is very good. But beyond that, then advising the family about how to take care of the patient, how to support the patient in the early stages so that he is not too dependent and does not lose out on his activities, and then categorizing the people according to their stages, and based on that, the activities to be done by the caregiver or to be looked after by the caregiver is something which requires not just the doctor's help, but also also, we have volunteers and counselors. So that requires much more effort. So yes, there is a diagnostic gap, there is a treatment gap, as well as there is a support gap for the rural areas and hinterlands. Once it's brought to the note of specialists, and there is an extension of hand for help, I do not think that any of us deny the help, but accuracy thereof and the availability of, say an MRI brain or a PET brain in those areas is again limited. So the biomarker-based diagnosis goes out of the window. So really, that's how we manage. And in cities and major hubs, we do have our helpline, and people do call us. Our volunteers are there, they're experienced people, and they counsel them over the telephone.
Can I add something to that?
Yeah.
So I have just said that most of the time, anybody suffering from any form of cognitive impairment, first of all, is not treated, is not taken as a disease. Most of the time, these people turn up in hospitals when they have other complaints. Either they have a fever, they have a cough, they have other infections. That is when they are brought to hospital. And often the diagnosis is made now by the health professionals as a secondary diagnosis, to realize that although these persons are presented with some form of illness, they seem to be having cognitive impairment. Now, once that diagnosis is made, the relatives have a big problem in faith, having faith in the formal care, because it is believed that this is a disease. Let me say that most of the time, it is believed that it is a spiritual illness or witchcraft. And so the formal care are not able to treat diseases of witchcraft or spiritual nature. And so they are taken to the alternative care people, the traditional healers, or they are taken to churches to be prayed for. So, and therefore in rural southwestern Uganda, we have two facilities which is carrying some form of care, but these are church-based institutions that offer some form of care, but not what is recognized in the Western world as care for people with dementia. So they are prayed for if they are, and after a while, if they have any other illness that it is treated, then they are given back to the relatives to go and manage at home. So really the care is carried out more at home than within the facilities. And again, if some medication is prescribed, it always very haphazard in that sometimes the patient is brought back. If the patient has not developed any other complaint, whatever period of medication is provided, that will be the end. They will stay at home and continue managing this person at home. So it's a bit of a challenge, both the diagnosis and the care. But as I was saying, we are beginning to engage a group of they're not really trained health providers. We call them community health workers or lay health workers, where we want to begin to train them using the WHO dementia toolkit. This toolkit, it provides them with the ability to recognize dementia. They can make basic diagnosis, and it also helps them to show how care for these people are given. So that's how we are beginning to engage the community to improve care for this, because formal care is still really very nascent or non-existent.
To let me add something about here in South America and especially in Brazil. Here, most patients are seen in the primary care also. We have a very some distinct aspects from Uganda and India. We will have very the medicines are for most patients available. Anticholinesterase inhibitors, antipsychotics, antidepressives, they are easily available. So one feature that we see here that some patients with Alzheimer's and other kinds of dementia arrive in our outpatient clinic with a lot of medicines, 2 antipsychotics, 1 antidepressive. It's very common that they arrive in our outpatient clinic with polypharmacy. So you have to remove all this medicine. So but another characteristic that we have here that because these medicines are available especially the anticholinesterase inhibitors, we see that even this medicine are available, the distribution is not equal. So here in our state, the richest part of the states are receiving most frequently these drugs, and the poorest part are not receiving so much. So we seen that the distribution of drugs are marking the diagnostic capacity of this region. So I think that it's a characteristic of our state, and I guess the most part of Brazil is South America.
Thank you for your responses. So we are going to move on to our next panel, but these panelists will be joining us a little later on for our roundtable discussion. I know Dr. Abua is about to be boarding a flight, so if you have any final closing remarks, please feel free to share with our audience.
So thank you so much, Jillian. I had sat in a quiet corner, but it was rather dark, so I have moved to where there's a bit of light, and I'm going to try to move in. I think this is a prayer room. So my last comments that I would want to give to the people on this call is that it is very important for the rest of the world to think of a way of providing some form of equity in the way neurocognitive impairment is handled in Africa, particularly Alzheimer's. It is true that whereas there is over 60 million people in the world today suffering from dementia, 60% of those are in Africa or in low and middle income countries. It is also predicted that, for example, in Uganda, currently we have 1.5 million people who are above 60 years old, out of about the 44 million people in the country. This is projected to rise to 5.5 million people by 2050. That means that the burden of dementia is definitely going to shoot up. It was predicted that in Africa, the number or the prevalence of dementia will rise by over 300% because of more people living longer, and the population is rising exponentially in Africa, and that comes along with the the older people developing dementia. Of course, age is a major factor in the development of dementia. And we cannot say, therefore, be able to prevent the development of dementia. We can try to mitigate by many, activities such as diet, such as physical activity, and so on. But there are many reasons why people develop dementia. And in Africa, because our lifestyles are also changing. Previously, the rural community are very active. They work throughout the day. They're physically active all the time. But because we are beginning to get slightly better off in terms of wealth, there are fewer and fewer people now engaged in physical exercise. That means that one of the protection mechanism that would protect us from developing dementia is being lost because we are no longer being active. So my prayer would be that the global West would think of a way of tackling dementia in low and middle income countries. The way, for example, programs have been developed for diseases like HIV and so on, because we are faced with other serious particular infections. And therefore, it is very easy for the health system to ignore a disease like dementia. So if something can be done to promote it, I know that the WHO, the WHO toolkit for dementia that I was referring to has become very handy, and we are beginning to use it. But the availability of medication and assisting in training of neurologists. Let me say something about training of neurologists. It is true that we do have people who opt to do neurology as their training. Unfortunately, as soon as they qualify, the West takes them away from us. So we are losing people who are qualified because the facilities that they're supposed to use for treating patients are not here. The West has those facilities, so these people are recruited and taken off, from our environment. That is something that we need to call some form of action to minimize the drainage that is taking place in this people. I would like to thank you, Gillian, for inviting me for this. And I hope that the discussions is really going to improve what can be done for dementia in Africa. I see my group beginning to leave to go and board the plane. I think I will leave at this time. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for being here. All right, so now I just want to thank all of our panelists for that very powerful. Thank you to all of our panelists for that very powerful discussion. As mentioned previously, they will be rejoining us a little bit later on for the roundtable discussion. But now we will be moving on to our US-based panel discussion, where we will hear from individuals who will share their US perspective of Alzheimer's disease. Our first panelist is David Page Lin. Dr. Lin is a project director at the Center for Evaluation of Value and Risk in Health in the Institute for Clinical Research and Health Policy Studies at Tufts Medical Center and associate professor of medicine at the Tufts University School of Medicine. Dr. Lin's research interests center on healthcare policy, health economics, and outcome research and cost-effectiveness analysis. Her current NIH-funded R01 grant investigates racial and ethnic disparities in dementia care. Our next panelist is Dr. Ganesh Babul. Dr. Babul is Assistant Professor of Neurology at Washington University School of Medicine, an adjunct associate professor at the George Washington University, and research associate in the Department of Psychology at the University of Johannesburg, South Africa. His research characterizes functional changes using biomarkers and identifies non-cognitive behavior markers that predict preclinical disease states. Additionally, his work assesses how social determinants of health, including poverty, racism, and chronic stress, impact health and well-being in underrepresented minority groups in the United States and low and middle income countries. Our final US-based panelist is Dr. Diana Kerwin. Dr. Kerwin is founder and president of Kerwin Medical Center, and a practice that focuses on the development of therapeutic and cures for neurodegenerative diseases. Dr. Kerwin has almost 20 years experience in clinical trial research for neurologic diseases such as Alzheimer's disease. Dr. Curran is board certified in internal medicine and geriatrics in Texas, Illinois, California, and Wisconsin. Prior to forming her memory care practice in Dallas, she was assistant professor of medicine geriatrics at Northwestern University in Chicago and faculty member of the world-recognized Northwestern University Cognitive Neurology and Alzheimer's Disease Research Center. It is my pleasure to introduce our three panelists. We will start with individual questions we received. Our first question is for Dr. Lin. Dr. Lin, we know you've done a lot of work looking at the implications of Medicare coverage of novel therapies of Alzheimer's disease. How do you think America can improve accessibility to these therapies? Are most medications usually covered by Medicare? And how can caregivers how about caregiving services?
Hello, everyone. Thanks very much for having me. I'm glad to be here. So this is a very big question with lots of small questions included in here, so I'll try my best to answer. So as Julian, you mentioned, I am a health economist, so I will try to give my thoughts from the health economics perspective. So for currently, the new therapies, they are targeting the earlier stages of Alzheimer's disease. And for these drugs to work, you really need to have a timely diagnosis. So insurance coverage is one thing, but people will need to be diagnosed early in the disease process in order to qualify for this treatment, in order for this treatment to be effective. So I think a timely diagnosis is really key here. And I heard in the earlier discussion that a few panelists also mentioned this type of diagnosis challenges in different countries. And it's the same thing in the US because we don't have enough dementia specialists, and most people get their diagnosis or at least get their cognition evaluated in the primary care physician's office in primary care setting. And we really need to think about the workforce in the primary care setting in order to really help patients get their cognition and behavioral symptoms evaluated and make the referral when needed. So I think that's the first step in order to use this drug. And you mentioned Medicare coverage. So I think this is clear, but just in case. So right now in the US, there's only one drug, FDA-approved drug, Aduhelm, that's targeting amyloid, the pathology, and it's the only FDA-approved drug in this class. And there are other treatment agents on the horizon, and we will learn more about the safety and efficacy of these new treatments very soon next year. So we will need to think about not just individual treatments, but more like these type of treatments in the same class. And this is one thing I wanted to mention. And another thing is that FDA approval does not equal patient access. In the US, healthcare payers all make their own decisions about whether they want to cover this drug and how to cover this drug and for what patient populations. For example, Medicare make its own decision. Some of you may have heard this decision just came out earlier this year. Medicare will only cover Aduhelm for a small population of Alzheimer's disease patients. And there's a lot of details and technical nuances, but the shorthand is only a small population of Alzheimer's patients will be covered by Medicare. Medicaid, by law, has to cover this drug, but state Medicaid programs can make their own decisions about their coverage criteria or the patient eligibility criteria and the conditions for continued treatment. And commercial payers, on the other hand, they also make their own decisions whether they want to cover this drug for their enrollees. And based on the data we are seeing right now, most of the largest commercial plans are not covering Aduhelm. And that's because they consider this drug investigational or experimental. So they do not feel the evidence is sufficient to cover this drug for their enrollees. So different payers make different decisions. That's the takeaway.
Thank you for that response. Our next question is for Dr. Kerwin. Dr. Kerwin, are there any groups in America who are more responsive or less responsive to Alzheimer's disease medications?
Oh, great. Hi. Thank you, everyone. I want to just thank the organizers and really appreciate being a part of this panel discussion. It's been spectacular what I've been able to listen to so far. As far as the responsiveness, that is one of the challenges that we have in clinical research is in order to determine that a drug, when we do apply it into clinical practice, when it is approved and payers are paying for it, will it work in all of our patients who are diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease? And the question that really has to be answered in clinical trial research design and enrollment. So really being sure that there's a diversity of the population, both geographically as well as race, ethnicity, different stages of disease, patients that are either carriers of some of the genes that we know are linked to Alzheimer's risk, such as ApoE4. We have found that the ApoE4 gene, which is a risk marker of Alzheimer's disease, that those patients sometimes will respond differently to, especially the anti-amyloid medications. So we're learning all of that. We haven't quite determined that there will be, at least in the leading class right now, such as Aduhelm, which is the monoclonal anti-amyloid therapies that are being developed, and there's several others in development as well. We're learning that in the clinical trials as far as will there be a difference in response to a patient based, again, on where they live, what their racial and ethnic background is, what their genetic makeup is. That's still being determined. What we are learning more about, which is kind of the first part of research, which is safety. Is there a different safety profile where maybe someone might be at increased risk of a side effect because of either their comorbid conditions or their genetic makeup? And so we are learning that with some of the anti-amyloid therapies. We're determining, if you have any other medications such as anticoagulants, is there a risk of side effects? Is there more risk if they're ApoE4 carriers? But as far as responsiveness, we really learned that by having diverse and well-designed clinical trials. And I do have to say that one of the, I think, criticisms of Aduhelm was that the population was not very diverse, at least in the United States. And again, you have to have studies outside of the United States as well, because again, we want to be able to determine those differences. And I think it's more important to know whether or not there's going to be a safety issue for a patient, as well as being able to determine if they will be responsive to the therapy. I will say that a lot of the trials that are in the late stages right now, phase 3, there is a very strong focus and commitment to increasing diversity in those participants that are in these clinical trials, so that we will be able to apply that knowledge when those drugs, if and when they go through approval and the FDA approves and they're approved by payers, that the individual physicians can feel that they have the information needed to have that discussion with the patient in front of them, as far as what will be their responsiveness to this drug, what can they anticipate, and also what are the side effects that they might need to watch for. So I think that's very important. And I think one thing about, just to follow up on Dr. Lin's comments about Aduhelm, I think one of the reluctance about coverage right now is we know that the anti-amyloid monoclonals are removing amyloid protein from the brain tissue. That's actually easy to measure. What we're having a harder time measuring is what will that actually mean to that individual patient? How will it really change the course of their disease? Will it slow down the progression? Will it stabilize their memory? Will we ever see any true stabilization or halting of the disease progression with treatments? And that's where really we have to have more time. The Aduhelm study, once they kind of gave it more time and let more data be gathered, they started to see that there was a difference. And that is one thing about clinical trial research, is that it really does take a significant number of years, especially for something like Alzheimer's disease, that is a multi-year disease that takes, sometimes, 10 years before development of accumulation of the amyloid and tau proteins in the brain tissue, degeneration of the neurons before you start to see a measurable memory loss. So in order to reverse a process that's been in the brain for 10 years, you can assume that it's going to take at least half that time, if not the full 10 years, in order to reverse it and have some either stabilization or improvement or in the brain function. So hopefully that answers the question somewhat, is that we still need more data to know who's going to be responsive and who's not, but we are gathering data on as far as safety profiles for patients so that we can have good informed consent discussions with them regarding these therapies.
Thank you for that response. Our next question is for Dr. Babulo. Have you noticed any disparities in accessing in seeking care in marginalized communities? Are there care centers readily accessible and equipped with technology to treat Alzheimer's disease?
Thank you very much for the invitation. I apologize, I missed the first half, but this is a great question, and the reason why I think it's extremely relevant is we know that by mid-century, the year 2050, the United States will become significantly more diverse. We know that if you self-identify as Black or African American, there's an expected growth to about 12% of the population. Hispanic or Latinx will go to about 22%. Asians, which is again an amorphous category, is expected to grow to about 10%. But more importantly, non-Hispanic whites are expected to decline, and for the first time, becoming a majority minority. But the reason why I bring those up in terms of this increase in diversity and changing in the population demographics is because we already know there are significant disparities as it relates to healthcare access, just in health outcomes as a whole, but this translates itself and is further compounded when we're thinking about Alzheimer's disease and related dementia. The Alzheimer's Association put out a special report last year that focused on specifically disparities as it relates to race and ethnicity. And they found that roughly about 66% Black, 39% Hispanic, and I think about 40% Native Americans thought that it was harder to obtain care for Alzheimer's disease. But more importantly, those specific three ethno-racial categories also reported healthcare discrimination varying from about 34% to 50%, just in the terms of accessing care. And then there was another question that was posited to this particular sample. And what they found was that if you, again, are Hispanic, Black, or Native American, they were twice as likely compared to the non-Hispanic white cohorts to say that they would not see a doctor if they were experiencing problems with their memory and thinking. And to me, I think that's extremely important too, because there's such a level of distrust with our healthcare system and the inability to be able to connect and to ensure that their needs are being treated. And so when you're thinking about, as Dr. Kerwin was mentioning, with the preclinical aspect of Alzheimer's disease, to use that specific etiology, it's typically a 15 to 20 year when you start to develop the pathophysiological hallmarks of the disease itself. And so that itself could be a point of intervention. However, there's the significant issue is a lack of awareness on what those symptoms are. And too often those symptoms are brushed off as just, as common with age. They think of it as just senility. And that itself conflates when they go to see a physician. It's typically much later in terms of achieving a diagnosis or obtaining a diagnosis. And so when we're thinking about treatment and implementation of specific, drugs that might be coming on down the pipeline, like Aduhelm or lecanemab, which is also heralding a lot of, I think, praise because of its success rates. How can we bridge these additional divides as it relates to accessing and obtaining care to talking about something like Alzheimer's disease or dementia and other specific dementias like vascular pathologies or dementia with Lewy body, recognize what those symptoms are, communicating them to the population at large, and then supporting different pathways for them to obtain care. And so it's truly a complex problem that's compounded over many decades here in the United States. And I think there is potentially no end in sight, but patient education is a significant forefront of advocacy and ensuring that they're aware of what those symptoms are and early screening. In terms of access, that itself is also a complicated question too, because depending on where you reside here in the United States, you could have access to the newest technologies, access to clinical trials or drugs that are coming down the pipeline. But if you're in rural areas or other portions of the countries where that's not readily available, we're talking about a significant divide here in terms of the haves and the have-nots. But I'm happy to elaborate on it a little further more. But those are my quick thoughts about that question.
Thank you for that response, and kind of building off of your question, and now we'll open the floor up to everyone. This is a question we received from the Q&A. What other current conditions have you noticed with people with Alzheimer's disease in America? Have you noticed any disparities in accessing and seeking care in marginalized communities?
Would you like to take that, Dr. Lin or Dr. Bobola?
Dr. Lin?
Well, sure, I can try to start and feel free to chime in. Just to build on what you said earlier, Dr. Babula, about this type of disparities, we also see that in our data using the national survey data linked with health insurance claims data. And we see that Blacks and Hispanics, for example, are less likely to have a formal diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease. And when they're diagnosed, they tend to have more severe Alzheimer's, meaning they have worse cognition and more functional limitations at the time of diagnosis. So that really suggests the kind of delay in getting Alzheimer's care. And another thing is the knowledge about whether they have Alzheimer's. We also see in our data that when the patients are diagnosed, Blacks and Hispanic patients are less likely to know they have Alzheimer's disease. So that's another layer of the problem. And this has implications for treatment, because if you don't have a diagnosis, then you're less likely to have a treatment, right? And this is probably not unique to Alzheimer's, I will say. We see this in other disease areas like cancer, for example. There are a lot of studies looking at this type of racial and ethnic disparities in cancer field, and similar trends here. So this is a big problem, not just unique to Alzheimer's, but it is a big problem.
Yeah. And I'd just like to add on to Dr. Lin's response. We just in clinical practice, we do see when we have, early memory screens in the community and things along those nature, that there's definitely, you have to make a very conscious, focused effort on how to get the information to the people in the way that they need to hear it, so they know it applies to them. And we've relied a lot on the primary care, a physician in the primary care practice or, community health practices in order to say, well, you should be able to reach these patients. But oftentimes, there are limited resources, depending on where they live. If it's an inner city urban area or a rural area, there's going to be more lack of time and resources. And a lot of times there's a lot of comorbidities that are being addressed because they're seen as more immediate or urgent, which is good. Blood pressure, diabetes control, managing all these comorbidities. But what we've learned with Alzheimer's disease is all these comorbidities actually also equate into increased risk and earlier onset of disease because of the combination of hypertension and diabetes on the brain that's also developing amyloid protein. And so you do, when we started to learn more about the brain-heart connection and hypertension, it seemed like, well, then we should be able to make more inroads into understanding the importance of the control of these risk factors to reduce risk of disease. But it still seems as though we're just not reaching that earlier risk reduction for individuals, especially if they come from either socioeconomically disadvantaged or racial minorities. It's not reaching them. And I think the good news is that I've seen, the evolution of, healthcare disparities research, such as what some of the panelists do here, to really help us determine how do we get over these barriers? How do we deliver the message correctly so that the patients that need to hear it understand that it's for them? And then how do we assist them in managing their individual health, their individual risk, and how do we develop individual risk reduction for them? We are learning, we know blood pressure control, diabetes control, cholesterol control, exercise, diet, all of those can have a very significant risk reduction for individuals, but we have to be able to get the information to them, and then we have to be able to assist them in implementing those lifestyles. And so it's a very big undertaking, but that I wish our healthcare system in the United States was more focused on some of the risk reduction. We have a lot, I'm in clinical trial research, and I do think the therapeutic development needs to happen, but that that opportunity for individual risk reduction, especially in the disadvantaged and minority communities, would be very helpful as well in helping us really make an impact on Alzheimer's disease.
I think those are both are exquisite responses to that question. And the only thing that I think I could add or on to further drill home the importance is this renewed focus, or at least a newer focus, on precision medicine and preventative medicine. And so as Dr. Kerwin explicated, all of those risk factors she listed are indeed actually risk factors for dementia overall. And then this is really epitomized in the 2020, I think, article from the Lancet's Commission on Dementia by Gil Livingston and colleagues. But they talked about roughly, 40% of the disease outcome is certainly intervenable, starting all the way from early childhood education, going into midlife, and you have, smoking prevention, hypertension, and then even air pollution as another construct, adding to that further piece as it relates to the larger built and natural environment and what they have access to or not, and what they're immersed in, that increases that risk factor. And so I think further, I think demonstrating this point is the earlier we're able to start in raising awareness to this, the better. And then it has to be a concerted approach, though, that's tailored for different communities, because one major city here in the United States is going to be very different from another. And then if we're thinking about rural versus urban versus suburban, those are also going to be different in terms of what resources they have access to, the clinicians that are working there, how much time they have to be able to not just speak with the patient, but to educate them and then communicate, this is exactly what you have. Perhaps I don't have the time to be able to dive into the specifics, but here's some resources that you can use to get further information, and that it can be subsequent follow-up. So I think that, it's extremely complex and it's multi-level, but for me, the earlier that we can raise awareness and get more education about, the better.
Thank you for those responses. We're going to take one more question, and then we're going to jump into our roundtable discussion, but we'll introduce back our international speakers. But for one final question here for our US-based panel discussion, this individual asks, what can we do for a loved one with Alzheimer's disease to slow disease progression and support them for men versus women?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the first half of that? Sorry, I heard most of it.
Sure, sorry. They ask, what can we do for a loved one with Alzheimer's to slow disease progression and support them for men versus women?
Okay, good. Well, so, good question. And especially since getting the information to the family and the person that's closest to the affected patient is really helpful, because they are at the linchpin from a care standpoint, having been a treating physician. They are the linchpin of how I can actually implement my treatment plan for patients that are diagnosed with cognitive impairment or Alzheimer's disease. The way to support them is, helping them, like I said, with the implementation of the treatment plan, no matter what the stage is. So being aware of the diagnosis, being aware that, what could the course be, but what can be done today in order to slow down the progression. And as the therapies begin to develop and fill in some of the gaps that we've had pharmacologically, the good news, going back to what we talked about with the risk factors, the good news is that we've learned a great deal about how much can really exercise impact brain function. And actually there's several studies now that show that 30 minutes a day, or there was a more recent JAMA article about how many steps per day and your gait and your gait velocity, that exercise habit, adding it in at any time, actually can help to slow the progression of the memory loss in someone who even has a diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease. And for someone who doesn't have a diagnosis but is at risk, either due to age or other factors, it actually can delay the onset of mild cognitive impairment or the early stages of an Alzheimer's presentation. So as a caregiver or having a loved one with Alzheimer's, the first thing is, looking at what can I do to help them implement these lifestyle changes that we do know are beneficial. So there's the exercise component. We do know also that a diet Susan Morris at Rush University did a lot of work on something called the MIND diet, which is a mix of Mediterranean and DASH diet that has been shown that if you actually have good compliance with it, you can actually reduce your individual risk of Alzheimer's disease as well. And then the other piece is, are they getting all of their health care, their general condition addressed? So for some people, although we're used to going to the doctor by ourselves, I do think that there should be more of a habit as we are younger of having another set of ears in the room, because when doctors visit, most people only really retain a small percentage of what is said. And you try to give it in verbal and written form and resources, but you really have to repeat it several times. So having someone else there to help answer, ask the questions so that they can apply the information to themselves individually, to be sure that is their blood pressure being addressed? What's their cholesterol level? How's their general health otherwise, can really help to slow down the progression of the disease, so that no matter what therapies become available, that person's brain function will be in a better place than without doing some of those lifestyle interventions. So I do see that the family members and loved ones are very, instrumental in implementing that. And then just the support of that they're dealing with the disease, and there's a lot of anxiety about what does the future hold. And so having, being able to go gather that information, talk with the person who's affected about what their concerns are in the future, planning for those if and when they ever occur is also a big part of managing Alzheimer's disease. My motto in my office was, we're going to plan for the worst, but we're going to do everything possible to be sure that we don't make it to that day. But if it ever did happen, I'd want to be sure that I knew what that patient's wishes were, what they would want us to do if that were to occur. But again, every day fighting to be sure that we never reach that, that day. And as far as the question about men versus women, from a disease standpoint, we know that it affects women more commonly than men, but from a implementation of treatment plans, there's not a lot of gender differences that we do in medical practice for men versus women. There's no differences right now in the treatments that we do, as far as I can tell. But so I would say just equally supporting the person regardless of what their gender is.
We just recently published a state of the science as it relates to differences between men and women and ADRD outcomes. I'll put that in the chat. But I think everything that Dr. Kerwin listed were really fantastic recommendations. Some of the other literature that shows is cognitive stimulation or engaging in activities that continue to challenge the brain, to use the brain. So there's that Hebbian philosophy: use it or lose it, and neurons that fire together, or that wire together fire together. And so we want to make sure that they're still using as much of that brain as possible. And then isolation, social isolation is unfortunately one of the biggest risk factors too for increasing dementia severity. And so, and especially after receiving a diagnosis. And so getting out, especially with, social circles that they may have had access to, or new social circles, but also caregiver support groups are out there to help the caregivers in addition to the loved one that is, diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. So there's I think a lot of options out there to ensure that they're aging and also progressing, but they're able to do it with dignity, and also they're anticipating, understanding what they can expect to transition from one phase into the next.
Those are excellent points, and I agree with everything what Dr. Kerwin and Dr. Babula said. And the only thing I might expand on is the comorbidity management, because we know that this is a patient population who are older, who also have to deal with other health problems like diabetes, heart diseases, hypertension, etc. And those things, having dementia or having Alzheimer's disease can complicate the management of these other health problems. So for patients and their family caregivers, they will need to manage a lot of different health problems. And I think a comprehensive care management plan is really important, not just focus on one disease, but more on the profile of this individual, and involving a care partner like Dr. Kerwin mentioned earlier, that's so important, so crucial in the disease process. And we need to provide more support for the caregivers as well, family caregivers.
Thank you for those responses and for that very powerful discussion. Our conversation will resume shortly, but first I would just like to introduce Dr. Dashini Ayutin, who is joining us live from Australia.
Hi, great to be here. Yeah, so I'm Darshini. It's 5:30 in the morning in Melbourne at the moment, but I'm a morning person. So I work at Monash University. I'm the deputy head of the Health and Social Care Unit. Loved catching the last end of that conversation. I do research in dementia that spans from prevention. So we target people who are at risk of dementia because they've got different health conditions or they have family members with dementia, all the way through diagnostics with biomarkers and medical imaging and digital cognitive assessments, and also to the care of people in hospital and in the home, so and in residential aged care for Australians. So great to be part of the conversation today.
Thank you for being here. And now I would also like to invite back to the stage Dr. Costello and Dr. Tripthy to join us for our international discussion. All righty, so now we will be discussing some international differences. We have received our first question, and please feel free, whoever would like to jump in. So first, this individual says, thank you so much for talking with us. If you had a strong government support and funding to change the system of care for people with dementia in your country, what would you do? Would you invest in building nursing home capacity, bolstering at-home skilled caregiving, or developing some other care model?
I think I can start. I think here in Brazil, that's maybe two great problems. The almost an existence of nursing care homes, especially for poor people. That's almost like non-existent. So the care of these patients that represents the most of population is very hard. And the second, the institution of preventable measures to here in Brazil we perform a study that saw that almost 50% of dementia can be prevented. So if some risk factors can be controlled, so physical activity, so the control of hypertension, the treatment of hearing loss. So measures to control these risk factors could be a lot of impact in the dementia incidence in our country.
I think one of the things that we're trying to do in Australia is to keep people living in their homes as independently for as long as possible. So there's been a big push by our governments, state and federal, to be able to provide more skilled workforce to people in their homes so that they can stay at home for longer. We don't have, well, we're in a bit of an aged care crisis as it is globally, but in residential aged care, that initially started as a sector to support people who were lonely. And now what they're kind of finding is that you have increasingly very frail people living there who need a higher level of medical support. And so that sector, that system has to also change in the sense of their workforce, and more funding required for more nurses, more occupational therapists, more physical therapists to kind of be able to provide that high level for advanced dementia, but for some of the other stages to be able to support people to live at home. But it is incredibly expensive. We haven't got all of the answers yet, nor do we have the workforce. So I think there's this big push at the moment to say, okay, how do we get the workforce trained? And also conversations about migration and how do we attract skilled migrants into our country to be able to do some of this work.
I know that Dr. Lynn and Dr. Babula will likely have more on the US perspective. I feel like, I love the way the question's posed, if you had a strong government support and backing. I do think in the United States, we rely a bit on kind of crisis medicine. The patients that I see, I oversee our geriatric consult service at the hospital, and the patients we see admitted. Oftentimes, if we had had better pre-hospital care, would have avoided that hospitalization, or also management of their multiple comorbidities. So in the US, I wish we did have systems where more prevention, more community-based interventions to promote healthy lifestyle, to reduce, social isolation. I love the idea of like bolstering up that workforce where we would have more of these skilled people who understand dementia, or even just understand aging physiology and how to help somebody navigate the healthcare system. Even that could make a big impact. I feel like most oftentimes we're kind of putting a Band-Aid on in the hospital and sending them out, and there's really no health advocate there to determine how do we prevent this from happening again, or how could we have prevented it from happening in the beginning. I wish we had, CAPA plans for everybody when we do have a bad outcome. So in the United States, I think that I wish there was more of I would really go more towards prevention. I would go towards community-based systems that could assist people. And then I would go for more sort of healthcare advocacy to be sure that people are having their risk factors addressed, and then also helping them access the services that they need when they need them in a timely manner, so that we can prevent some of those late stage complications that occur when people just don't have access to good information or to their healthcare practitioner. I mean, we're seeing, we see how often people end up in urgent care and emergency rooms because they can't get into their physician's office, or if they go in the physician's office, getting access to the testing they need, or other resources. So this is such a big issue. And I know the US is, we should be seen as probably one of the strongest healthcare systems, but I still think we're lacking in many ways, maybe because our focus is in the wrong areas. We're very focused on high technology, therapeutic interventions, which we need. And I'm glad that we do that, but I do wish we found some of the lower, not as sexy, maybe preventative measures and healthcare systems and workforce and things like migration would be fantastic. So I really love all those comments that were made by Dr. Castillo and everybody. So thank you.
Any other final comments for that question? If not, we will move on to our next question. So our next question comes from one of our volunteers, and they ask, what practical tips can students use to connect with their buddies for different cultures who do not share their identity? And for National Alzheimer's Buddies, just to review, our buddies are our dementia patients, so we just call them buddies. So if anyone wants to tackle that question.
I love the buddies focus. Just so you know, at Northwestern, we actually had a student buddy program as well. So, and it was just fantastic. But I think just the fact that the volunteers are asking the question about cultural connection for different people, and being sensitive to that. And even sometimes it's not even a cultural, it's maybe, what their family perspective was growing up about how they viewed aging, how they viewed disease, how they viewed dementia. Do they find it embarrassing? Are they willing to talk about it? How you can help them through that. So I just think I just want to commend the program and the volunteers that you have. But I'll let the other panelists add, but I just wanted to make a quick commentary.
One of the projects I'm involved in is we do train volunteers to support older people when they're in hospital and in that 30-day transition home, because we know that that's a big risk factor, and they are kind of advocates and navigators of our health system as well. But one of the things we train our volunteers in is to see the person as a whole person, and train them in, I guess, those conversations around things like, sharing memories or stories from childhood or from their work, or, kind of trying, and, we work with their families or other people who know the person well. What are things they like to talk about? Are there pets that they like to talk about? And inevitably culture will come into that. And one of the things our volunteers often are quite taken back about is how much they get exposed to different foods and different kind of home situations, and learning from culture. And so just being aware of the environment and being able to kind of pick up on some of those cues and say, hey, tell me about that, or what does this mean to you? Can be really kind of great conversations that can connect to that person. And I think one of the things that I find extraordinary is that point of connection to memory or orientation, like where were you when this happened, touching into sight, smell, sound, and kind of orienting a person in that way can be really helpful practice for people. So love that our volunteers are being trained in that, and they find it incredibly helpful. And I guess some of our volunteers are being volunteers because they have family members who are living with Alzheimer's disease and dementia, and they're taking a lot of their learnings back to their families as well around how to have those conversations. So yeah, that would be something from my research that I'd share with you guys.
Yeah, so I could pitch in there, and we do have volunteers, but the numbers are so huge because a few volunteers to so much more population that is there in our country. The volunteers are available. They do home visits in Delhi at least, and the problem areas are identified after sitting with the caregiver for a few hours. So that's being done. Identifying caregiver issues, because the patient is one, but the caregiver is also a kind of a patient at home, because there's a lot of denial, anxiety, depression, insomnia, which the caregivers have. So tackling those issues and advising the primary caregiver as well as the patient both, I think there's more required, more number of volunteers are required, more training is required. So as of now, it's just a drop in the ocean.
So I just wanted to add, I do love the concerted and overt focus on culture, and especially here in the U.S., there's been a renewed shift across not just practice itself, but also in academia and research, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And those four sort of pillars are underscoring the heterogeneity and the richness of an individual. And we're not just talking about typical things like, race or ethnicity or, sex and gender, but even within a specific ethno-racial group, there's significant heterogeneity and variability. And so I think one of the biggest things the students can get exposure to is just volunteering and go to many different facilities if you have access to them, work with as many families as you can. And it's that real live world experience as you're working through different families that will allow you to better understand and appreciate not just the variance in terms of culture, but also how to tailor your approach, interacting from one person to the other, because there's so much differences there, and it's the differences that we need to really focus and hone in on, but also going in with an open-minded and trying to reduce those individual biases as much as possible.
Well, I think that's a great idea, and lots of good suggestions here. And listening to the conversation, I feel that we need to talk more, because you guys are doing amazing work, and you have to let us know, what challenges you have and what kind of data or research you need can help you navigate in your work. So we need to talk more, and maybe we as researchers or clinicians can provide more information to help you with that.
Thank you for those wonderful responses. Our next question asks, how can psychiatrists and other allied health professionals play a role in disease management or help address the socio-emotional needs of patients and caregivers?
I guess I'll give some few initial remarks. One thing is the importance of the recognition of anxiety, depression as very common comorbid conditions in patients, both with mild cognitive impairment, with dementia, but also for caregivers. And the one thing I find is really important is the importance of having caregivers feel okay to tell their healthcare providers that they are caregivers, so that the healthcare providers can be aware that they're at increased risk of depression, they're at increased risk of not having their blood pressure checked and not doing their regular health screenings, because they're giving a lot of their time and energy to their loved one that they're caring for. So that's where, again, with the Buddies program, helping, for those caregivers, empowering them to say, we really need you to maintain your health in order to maintain the health of the person that's affected. So I think in general, just the psychiatrist role is usually as an adjunct of the primary care provider really needs to be astute in understanding that there's increased risk of, again, depression, anxiety in both the caregiver as well as the person with Alzheimer's, and then making those referrals when it's appropriate. But it can be very instrumental. For psychiatrists, there are some psychiatrists that do both medication as well as therapy, but oftentimes the psychiatrist is at least in my practice, the psychiatrists that I refer to are really good at identifying therapists and support groups in the area that can help either the person with Alzheimer's that has anxiety and depression be able to talk to a counselor about it, who understands also what they're going through with memory issues, but then also for the caregivers, either getting them to support groups that can then refer them to counselors and therapists to help them, again, maintain their mental health and empower them to still take care of their physical health, so that we can keep them from having a lot of the issues we know that happen to caregivers, which is bad health, and they end up in the hospital, and then the person that's affected is oftentimes impacted by that, because then that support system is gone. So I do think that psychiatrists and, again, therapists, counselors, support groups can have a very significant role in helping to care for someone over time.
So our next question, our attendee asks, how do you navigate misconceptions of dementia with patients receiving the diagnosis for the first time, especially if they have different cultural / different beliefs about the disease process?
So in India, it's very difficult to get through to the caregivers that the person does have a problem, whether it be just memory, reading, writing, or whatever 2+ domains. Very often they repeatedly ask, so will the medicine make him completely all right? And what is the prognosis? So you have to explain it to them. They are more or less not willing to accept that there's no pill to cure it. They can't believe it. And they are often groping for methods of removing the disease completely, which we know is a dream still to come true. And very often our patients and caregivers approach non-medical therapies, whether it's herbs, whether it's some kind of Ayurvedic, which we call the herbal medicine, or the homeopathic medicine, or alternate medicine systems. So we do find that happening a lot. We also find over-the-counter medications being used quite a lot. A lot of medicines are used without prescription for sleep issues, for behavior issues, and sometimes the triggers are not identified, and it's easier for them to obtain a prescription from any level of healthcare provider. So most of them are actually in denial and don't want to accept the diagnosis. It takes about 2 or 3 visits to get it across, and tell them that they have to devise strategies and methods of getting around the patient problem areas.
Yeah, so to add on to, I think, that response from Dr. Tripathi, a stigma is something that I think is so profound, and it communicates itself across barriers, but it manifests very differently. And so some of the studies that we do, for example, in South Africa and Pakistan, Afghanistan, and even in India, is there's this initial preconception that, you know, it's not a specific disease, but it's something that's done to the person, whether that's the evil eye or voodoo or some type of witchcraft, which unfortunately itself takes the onus away from the disease itself. And it can be very, very challenging, especially to watch the slow deterioration over time. But even here in the United States too, you know, for folks to do understand that pathology and to understand what exactly is dementia or the sub etiologies like Alzheimer's, it's still very challenging to communicate that to typically the family members. What we found is the ones that have the most difficult time saying, all right, well, mom or dad are really going through this, and we can't tell them what the diagnosis is. And I have a story. My wife's family, her grandfather actually went through the same thing. They didn't tell him that he had a diagnosis, and it was quite a few years. It wasn't until he's probably in the moderate stages of the disease where it was difficult to hide. And part of it too is, you know, there was this familial connection where his father had Alzheimer's disease, and so and then, you know, the kids and that continuing across the generations itself, it impacts not just the individual, but everyone within that circle there, and everyone deals with it in a very different way. And so that stigma, again, it's so powerful to address, I think, as quickly as you can, in a way that's respectful to the individual's beliefs and what they're thinking. But I think this is the core of where the education itself has to be driven, with at least some evidence, and then social support and folks that are going through very similar, you know, or as close to the situations that they're going through.
Yeah, I just want to add a couple of comments. I think what's been said so far is spot on. I do think dealing with the myths and misconceptions about the disease is the most challenging part. Oftentimes, you know, Dr. Tripathi said, you know, sometimes it takes 2 to 3 visits. I find sometimes I have families where it takes 2 years of saying the same thing in the office before they finally get it. And then understanding, a lot of times, because it can run in families, not always, most of the cases are sporadic, but, you know, they think back to what that experience was with their loved one, you know, 20, 30 years ago. And I tell them now, although we don't have that cure yet, our knowledge base now, the disease is very different now than it was even 10, 15 years ago when I first went into this field. We can give more information. We can help guide them more. The medications are still just a secondary to this. There's so many other things that can be discussed and get rid of the myths and misconceptions so that they can manage the disease and get rid of the stigma. The stigma is really very difficult, and it is different in different cultures. I found when I first started practicing, if it was a Spanish-speaking Latino family, dementia was not a term they liked because it was more of that meant mental health crazy, whereas Alzheimer's they would accept. And then other families who were of other backgrounds, they didn't want to hear Alzheimer's, but if you told them it was dementia, that was okay. The doctor said, I have dementia, so thank goodness it's not Alzheimer's, kind of thing. So again, that misinformation that you really battle, and I wish we did have more specialists and nurses, nurse practitioners, physician extenders, counselors, social workers that could give that really good information, because it needs to be repeated again and again, not because the memory issues, but because it takes a while to really put your mind around it. I mean, for many of the panelists, we've been doing this for years and years and years, and we still don't know everything about this disease. And so to be able to convey that knowledge to a patient in one visit or to a family member in one visit is just not reasonable. So I think we have to continue to accept that it is a long-term learning. Families that try to get as much information, getting them the resources as much as possible can again help to reduce that stigma, so they know that they're not the only ones going through this. There are others, and people and families deal with things in different ways, again, depending on how they were raised or what they think of this disease. So I think it's so important just to have as many people around them and interacting with them at many different points that can help get them the information that they need at the time.
I just said something that here in Brazil had a lot of stigma too, and we face another situation that the family members accepted too easily the diagnosis of dementia because they think is the aging, the aging process, so they don't care a lot about them. And okay, it's my father memory is getting old, and no, okay, and it's not aging, it's dementia, it's Alzheimer, it's vascular dementia. So it's another kind of stigma that we face, and can be sometimes very complicated to the dealing with some symptoms. So
thank you for those responses. And although I would love to continue this conversation, I want to respect our panelists' times. Therefore, I ask each of our panelists to provide any final thoughts and how you believe we can spread awareness for Alzheimer's disease across cultures and work together globally to combat this disease.
I guess I'll I want to just commend your group. I think all the panelists, we do many of these programs, and this is just a fantastic panel. The content, the discussion, this is how we will improve awareness and start to break down some of the issues with barriers based upon both geographic and socioeconomic and racial and ethnic background issues that come up in the disease. Just keeping these communications open, the awareness that I have from other groups of what they see in their practice and their area of research is just so helpful. And I think just commending all the volunteers to be a buddy with this disease. It is just, I can't tell you how much that is likely making an impact that has a ripple effect, not just for the buddy that you're with, but for their family and for really how the disease will be lessened in the impact because you're in their life. So I just want to thank everybody and just want to thank you again for putting together this program.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I just think, the more that we can provide experiences for people to learn more about what it's like to live with Alzheimer's disease or dementia, and volunteering is incredible. It's an incredible way to build that awareness and knowledge base and have that ripple effect on to your friends, to your families, and to talk about it, because it is that destigmatizing. It is about bringing the person first and kind of saying there are things that we can do in how we interact and how we care for people that will make a difference. And sometimes it's just learning those little tricks and tips, and it's not easy, but I think to be able to have a community that does this together is an incredible thing to be part of. So thank you so much, guys. This has been fantastic, and it's been great to hear from everyone.
Yeah, I completely agree. And what I'd like to also add is there's so much resources out there that are being updated really on an annual basis. So here in the US, the Alzheimer's Association publishes its annual report. Alzheimer's Disease International publishes a world report every year. And the World Health Organization recently launched its first ever blueprint on dementia research. And so there's a lot of information out there from well-respected and reputable sources just for you all to stay abreast on what's occurring, what's coming down the pipeline. So thank you for your work.
Yes, keep up the great work. You guys are amazing. And if you have any questions or if you think we can be of any help in any way, feel free to reach out. If anyone wants to learn more about health economics, I'm happy to chat. Anyways, I think this is a great event and we should keep talking.
We don't have too much volunteer work here in Brazil, and nothing similar to the Buddies program. So I think it's fantastic work, and so maybe your work can inspire the young people here in Brazil to start something similar. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you again for such a wonderful event and for bringing awareness to Alzheimer's disease at a global scale. And thank you to our panelists today for their contributions to today's event. Thank you for attending our third annual National Alzheimer's Buddies Virtual Symposium. 2022 marks the 11th anniversary of Alzheimer's Buddies. And before we close, I just want to reiterate our thanks to our panelists for their contributions to today's event. I also would like to thank my team, Ridley Patel, our Director of Community Engagement, and Shrenya Menon, our Chief Diversity Officer, for their role in bringing today's event to life, in addition to our executives and our interns. You'll find a quick survey in the chat if you don't mind filling it out in order for us to receive feedback on today's event. By filling out the survey, you will be entered to win one of two $25 Amazon gift cards. In addition, November is Alzheimer's Awareness Month, and National Alzheimer's Buddies has been working hard to provide care packages for our buddies, so please feel free to donate using the QR code. Additionally, we would like to continue your support in our awareness campaign, #ForgetMeNot, where we are hoping to spread awareness for Alzheimer's disease and related dementias. And with that, I would like to close today's event and just thank everyone for their participation.